Hi, good day everyone. This is AJ Banudizan from Baals, and this is my individual report in Jack 105 entitled the 1899, the MALOLOS Constitution, and 1935, the Commonwealth Constitution. So first, let's get to know what is 1899 MALOLOS Constitution. So, the 1899 Malolos Constitution is the first important Filipino document ever produced by the people's representatives. It is anchored in democratic traditions that ultimately had their roots in American soil. It created a Filipino state whose government was popular, representative, and responsible, with three distinct branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The Constitution enumerated specifically provided for safeguards against abuses and enumerated the national and individual rights not only of the Filipinos and of the aliens. So, the political constitution of 1899, informally known as the Malolos Constitution, was the constitution of the first Philippine Republic. It was written by Felipe Calderon y Roca and Felipe Buencamino as an alternative to a pair of proposals to the Malolos Congress by Apolinario Mabini and Pedro Paterno. The political constitution of 1899 is written in Spanish, which was the official language of the Philippines at the time. It is composed of 101 articles divided into 14 titles, with transitory provisions in 8 further articles and with one unnumbered additional article. The main points of the Malolos Constitution: it established a democratic republican government with three branches: the executive, legislative, and the judicial branches. It called for the separation of church and state. The executive powers were to be exercised by the President of the Republic with the help of his cabinet. So it is patterned after the Spanish Constitution of the 1812 with influences from the charters of Belgium, Mexico, Brazil, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Guatemala, and the French Constitution of the 1793. The Malolos Constitution, namely the Cartilla and the Sangguniang Hukuman, the Charter of Laws and Morals of the Katipunan, written by Emilio Jacinto in 1896, the Biak na Bato Constitution of 1897, planned by Isabelo Artacho, Mabini's Constitutional Program of the Philippine Republic of 1898, the Provisional Constitution of Mariano Ponce in 1898 that followed the Spanish constitutions, and the autonomy projects of Paterno in 1898. The Malolos Constitution was the first republican constitution in Asia. It declared the sovereignty resides exclusively in the people, stated basic civil rights, separated the church and state, and called for the creation of an assembly of representatives to act as the legislative body. It also called for a parliamentary republic as the form of government. The president was elected for a term of 4 years by a majority of the assembly. It was titled Constitución Política and was written in Spanish following the Declaration of Independence from Spain, proclaimed on January 20, 1899, and was enacted and ratified by the Malolos Congress, a congress held in Malolos, Bulacan. So, the Constitution as a whole is a monument to the capacity of the Filipinos to chart their own course along democratic lines. In a period of storm and stress, it symbolized the ideals of a people who had emerged from the dark ages into the light of reason. The next is the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution. So let's discuss first what is the Commonwealth Constitution. So the 1935 Constitution, which featured a political system virtually identical to the American one, became operative. The system called for a president to be elected at large for a 4-year term, a bicameral Congress, and an independent judiciary. Its importance is that it provided the legal basis of the Commonwealth government, which was considered a transition government before the granting of the Philippine independence with American-inspired constitution. The Philippine government would eventually pattern its government system after American government. So, the 1935 Constitution was written, approved, and adopted in 1934 by the Commonwealth of the Philippines, 1935 to 1946, and later used by the Third Republic, 1946 to 1972. It was written to meet requirements set forth in the Tidings-McDuffie Act to prepare the country for its independence. The Commonwealth Constitution was ratified to prepare the country for its independence. This constitution was dominantly influenced by the Americans, but possessed the traces of the MALOLOS Constitution, the German, Spanish, and Mexican constitutions of several South American countries, and the unwritten English Constitution. It originally provided a unicameral legislature composed of a president and vice president elected for a 6-year term without re-election. It was amended in 1940 to provide for a bicameral legislature composed of a Senate and a House of Representatives. The president is to be elected to a 4-year term, together with a vice president with one re-election. The right of suffrage for male citizens of the Philippines who are 21 years of age or over and are able to read and write were protected. This protection later on extended to the right of suffrage for women 2 years after the adoption of the Constitution. The draft of the Constitution was approved by the Convention on February 8, 1935 and was ratified by President Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. on March 25, 1935. Elections were held on September 16, 1935, and Manuel L. Quezon was elected as the first President of the Commonwealth of the Philippines. Preamble says, the Filipino people, imploring the aid of divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody their ideals, conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, promote the general welfare, and secure to themselves and their posterity the blessings of independence under a regime of justice, liberty, and democracy, to ordain and promulgate this Constitution. The original 1935 Constitution provided for a unicameral National Assembly, and the President was elected to a 6-year term without the possibility of re-election. It was amended in 1940 to have a bicameral Congress composed of a Senate and a House of Representatives, as well the creation of an independent electoral commission, and to grant the President a 4-year term with a maximum of 2 consecutive terms in office. A constitutional convention was held in 1971 to rewrite the 1935 Constitution. The convention was sustained with manifest bribery and corruption. Possibly the most controversial issue was removing the presidential term limit so that Ferdinand E. Marcos could seek re-election for a 3rd term, which many felt was the true reason for which the convention was called. In any case, the 1935 Constitution was suspended in 1972 with Marcos' proclamation of martial law, the rampant corruption of the constitutional process providing him with one of his major premises for doing so. So, the Commonwealth was the culmination of efforts to secure a definitive timetable for the withdrawal of American sovereignty over the Philippines. Early on, at the start of the American occupation, the United States had established local governments with local elected town and provincial officials. Afterward came a gradual expansion of national legislative representation, beginning with the Philippine Assembly or Lower House in 1907. It was not until the Jones Law of 1916 that the pledge of eventual independence, once Filipinos were ready for self-governance, was made. The Jones Law led to the creation of an all-Filipino legislature composed of the Philippine Senate and House of Representatives. However, the position of Chief Executive, the Governor General, and what was considered the most important cabinet portfolio, public instruction, precursor to the Department of Education, were reserved for American officials appointed by the President of the United States. Half of the Philippine Supreme Court was reserved for Americans as well. Independence missions from 1919 onwards were periodically sent to the U.S. Congress and the White House to lobby for and negotiate independence. In 1931, the Ozarks mission, which stands for Osmeña and Rojas, successfully lobbied for the enactment of the Hair Hose Cutting Act, which was passed over the President Herbert Hoover's veto in 1932. This was, however, rejected by the Philippine legislature. In 1934, a new mission, the Quay mission made up of Quezon, Benigno Aquino Sr. and Rafael Alunan, negotiated the Tidings-McDuffie or the Philippine Independence Act, which set a 10-year transition period to be known as the Commonwealth of the Philippines, followed by the recognition of the independence of the Philippines by the United States. The Tidings-McDuffie Act established the parameters for the preparatory period. Some powers of supervision were reserved to the United States, as well as foreign diplomacy and currency. In all other respects, the Philippines became self-governing. The Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Philippines provided for a presidential system of government with a unicameral legislature. It had the power to enact laws for the Philippines known as Commonwealth Acts through the National Assembly. The Commonwealth was meant to lay down the foundations for an independent, fully functional state. Its priorities could be seen in the first laws enacted by the new National Assembly. Commonwealth Act No. 1 established the Philippine Army and a national defense policy. Commonwealth Act No. 2 established the National Economic Council. Commonwealth Act No. 3 created the Court of Appeals. The 1935 Constitution was amended in 1940 to permit the re-election of the President and the Vice President, to restore the Senate and thus shift the legislature back to the bicameral system, and to establish a national electoral authority. The Commission on Elections, the proposed amendments were ratified in a plebiscite held in 1940. So, all in all, the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution provided the legal basis of the Commonwealth government, which was considered a transition government before the granting of the Philippine independence with American-inspired constitution. The Philippine government would eventually pattern its government system after American government. It has been said that the 1935 Constitution was the best written Philippine charter ever. And that would be all for my individual report. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.